So with the start of this project or class assignment that we got where we had to walk around and listen to the podcast that we chose, well, for me it was one that I chose, and read this article, I felt like during the actual class time when I was listening to it, I was just kind of taking in the information about everything and not really actually feeling the emotion and everything. I wasn't truly to be able to take in the information that was being told by her. And so later that night, I decided to go on another walk when there was less people around and actually be able to listen to it. So I went down to the creek that I like to go and just listen to music and stuff like that. And it's just on campus. It's I have a picture that I took from that night when I was sitting there, and I can try to put it here. But I was just sitting on a rock, and the podcast starts off with her family being told about how growing up she never really knew how her family grew up or where they came from, and it was kind of just a secret because obviously they were so discriminated against, and she was kind of sheltered and didn't want her family didn't really want her to know that, I guess. And that kind of really affected her. And I guess right when her great aunt started to actually open up with where she came from, you can tell when she starts talking about it, how much it affects her. And just sitting at the creek and listening to her tell her great aunt's story about, and just how the cotton workers were sold as literal objects and items. It was so just, I don't know, I was just sitting there, and it was such a peaceful time, and it's a place that I go for such peace, and feel I'm I don't know, I just feel very grateful there. And when I'm sitting there listening to someone else's such terrible story about how they're so discriminated against and how these black men were literally objects that people sold, it just makes you feel I don't know, it made me feel very emotional, and it just makes you feel more wow, this is real life, and it's still going on today. So I was just sitting at the creek, and by the time of the end of it was a 45-minute podcast, and it was multiple parts. I was sitting there and just thinking wow, sitting here my butt hurts already, and I've only been sitting here for maybe an hour, maybe. And I was just thinking when I went back, so I was listening to the podcast, and then I went back and read the article, and they had a few different it also touched on cotton workers, and not just cotton, but people working in the fields and getting sold off to be slaves for the white men. There was pictures, and I can try to grab them from the article and put them here too, but of them working, and you can tell they're just bending over all afternoon, all day, and on top of that they're so malnourished, they're not getting fed. It's I'm sitting here, and my I'm starting to feel pain just from sitting on this brush and this rock, and it makes you think wow, no, they bent over all day, and still to this day are still discriminated against. Obviously slavery is not really a thing, but in its own form there's still discrimination. But yeah, it just made me at first when I was listening to it during class, I just kind of took in all the information, and I was yeah, this is what life was like, and still there's problems to this day, and there's the 1619 movement that helped, and there was the whole thing about it, but you never really take in the information when there's so many other things going on around you. And when I went down to the creek just for my instead of listening to music that night, I decided to listen to the podcast again. It really just makes me realize it hit a lot more than I was expecting. I was sitting there in my comfy clothes that I have, and yeah, I was still uncomfortable, and I was just sitting in such a peaceful place, and I wasn't forced to be there, but I was still uncomfortable. But yeah, just really kind of hit differently than I was expecting when I was outside.